So awesome. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Jessica. I suppose let's get started. I mean, if you can, we already started talking before we even press record. So if you can do a introduction to all the listeners that are listening in, that would be awesome.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Jess Lorimer. I am the founder of Selling to Corporate. I know, incredibly boring name, but really good for SEO if anyone's thinking about starting a business. Probably most importantly, I've been in sales since literally day dot. We were just discussing how I've been in the sales world since I was 15, successfully selling anything from jewelry right up until high-end recruitment. And I've been running my own sales training consultancy primarily for sports firms for the last 10 years. So that's quite exciting. More importantly, I am the person you can rely upon at the karaoke to always sing The Real Slim Shady by Eminem, because it is the best song ever. I will die on that hill. And I have a dog, a husband in the army, and I have a real aversion to sunshine. So I am the person you find on a Scandinavian holiday in the freezing cold, loving it.
That's well, explains why, you're living in the UK.
Still.
So I suppose what sort of inspired you, I suppose, to go down the route of coaching entrepreneurs, and how did that journey start?
Completely accidentally, if I'm honest. I think I thought I would be in my corporate career forever. So I started out in recruitment, selling in tech professionals to public sector and not-for-profit firms in 2008. Absolutely loved it, had a great time. I thought I was a fully paid up member of the Briefcase Club. Like, I was loving corporate life. And then in 2013, I was diagnosed with chronic illness. So I was diagnosed with ME, myalgic encephalitis, and the doctor basically said, really lovely neurologist, but he said, look, you're working 70, 80 hours a week. You're putting your body through too much strain. And if you continue doing that, you will end up in a wheelchair by the time you're 35.
Right.
And I was like, whoa. I mean, we've all
Wake
been
up.
there, like 23. And I thought I would live forever. You know, you're really arrogant in your 20s and you're like, this is going to be fine. And so I went to the company I was working for and I said, look, what do I do? Can I go part-time? And they were really honest. And no, it wasn't something that was going to work for them. So I said, okay, cool. And I set up my business. I cried the whole way home with my box of stuff on the Tottenham Court Road tube, and got home, sold my flat in London, moved down to Southampton on the south coast, and set up a business. And obviously I had lots of restrictive covenants of things that I couldn't do. So I knew I wasn't going to be in recruitment again.
Yeah.
And I stumbled onto Facebook, which I hadn't been a huge user of before, and realized there were a bunch of people asking questions about how to sell things on Facebook. You know, not Facebook Marketplace, didn't exist
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
I'm a dinosaur. And yeah, I saw all these people being like, how can we sell in our own businesses to other people on Facebook? And I just started answering some questions. I was like, there you go, you know, you could try this, you could try that. And about a year later, I'd made just over £150,000.
I'm doing
But
what?
yeah, yeah.
From
So
from
from
from,
teaching,
coach, from coaching people how to sell.
yeah.
Wow.
So I built that up. And I tell everybody in my first 3 months was shocking. I just sat there helping people on Facebook because I'd really fallen out of the work piece. I started getting up at like 8:30 in the morning. I was like, oh, this is nice, have a cup of coffee, chill out. And then I realized, I was like, if I keep doing this, I'm not going to have any money and this is going to be a real problem. So I started selling, did about 150K in the first year, teaching people how to sell their products and services. And then it went for about 4-5 years, really, really successfully. And we hit 2019. And that was the year I turned 30. You've obviously turned 30 more recently than me. So
Yeah.
you know that turning 30, everyone makes out it's this huge deal. And I was actually really excited. I was like, turning 30 is going to be amazing. I'm going to have this huge party. It's going to be great. And my life just fell apart. Like a long-term relationship ended. I realized that I didn't really love the business I built. Everyone had taught me to do these marketing funnels and get hundreds of people buying stuff. And I just didn't really have any contact with people anymore. And
Yeah.
for me, it was really quite depressing. So I figured I still loved the consultancy side of my business, still loved teaching sports firms and their sales teams how to sell sponsorship, corporate partnerships, hospitality, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I saw loads of entrepreneurs who were selling their services but trying to sell them to other entrepreneurs. And they just weren't getting the traction because, weirdly enough, small business owners, they don't want program managers or project managers. They're just not ready for that yet. And so I said, I was like, have you thought about selling this to corporate companies? And people thought I was crazy. So burnt down my business overnight. I decided in February that I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to teach people how to sell to other people. I'm going to teach people how to sell to companies. In the June, we set up the Selling to Corporate podcast. And within the first 6 months, we'd sold out our first event in the November. And we did a 125k launch that first November.
And what and when you did that, what were you selling? Like from you did your first event, what was that event about?
So it's called Converting Corporates. We still run it now. We basically at that event do 2 days of intensive implementation workshopping around different B2B sales topics. So that first one, we covered how to run a sales call with your prospects and how to handle objections, how to write proposals for corporate companies. And we had 85 people in the room at that first one. And over 20 of them bought the C-suite, which is the program that we still sell today. We've been testing that for 4 years now. And that has
how much that costs?
Yeah, of course. Now it's £2,000, so it's super affordable. When I started out selling it, it was all me doing the live support. So we started at 5,000. Over time, it went up to a maximum of 7,500, including live support. We now sell it as a self-study because we were CPD accredited about 3 years ago with it to create a better learning experience for people. And we now have a 96% success rate of people generating their entire ROI back within the first 6 months. So
that's amazing. Who's it accredited by, just out of interest?
CPD. And they're really, really good. I'd recommend them. They are very stringent on their processes, which is, I always think it's difficult when you've been selling something for a while to look back and go, okay, but it works. And the accrediting body are like, yeah, but have you thought about how accessible it is? Or have you thought about, how it looks? And no, was the answer. I hadn't thought about any of those things. Now we have, and that's all fully in place.
It's awesome. Yeah, no, we've been through that process with CPD ourselves. It's it's a long process. We've just gone through the off-qual regulation to do diplomas. So yeah, I know exactly how that is.
That requires a lot of coffee, I think.
Yeah, a lot of coffee, a lot of time as well, just putting all of the material together, what people are actually sort of, what they require and everything else. It was just, it was an absolute ball ache just to get through the whole thing. But hey, we got there in the end. And again, accreditation speaks volumes when you're at that sort of stage. But so I suppose where are you at now? What are you doing now?
So I guess now I'm heading into the downward spiral of my 40s. Shortly.
You sound so depressed about your age, and you're literally only a few years older than me. Like you're not even like over the halfway line yet, and
look how excited I was about my 30s. Like I was like, oh my god, I'm going to be so good at this. And then
you literally just said, you literally just said like, I'm a dinosaur. Like it's like I don't think anyone's saying that in their 30s.
I don't know. In sales, I think everyone is, because in sales nobody lasts that long. So it's like we're all kind of diminishing rapidly. But no, I'm excited about the next few years. So we've got some really exciting things coming up. I'm doing a lot of brand work with some big companies, which is fun. I am a huge data nerd, so I'm taking on some really cool KPI and metric overhaul projects with companies, which is nice. And we've just had our 821st person by the C-suite, which is pretty cool. So we're going to continue running that. And hopefully just supporting more people to sell their services into corporates, because ultimately it's where the money is in this economy. It's much better for people who, like you, like I, are actually interested in what you do and passionate about it. It's much easier to work with corporate clients repeatedly than it is to try and keep the influencer status going. So I guess maybe that's my campaign, is to get people being influencers for companies and being paid by companies to do it, rather than feeling like they have to be an influencer in their own life and on the ground.
I agree. I think it's very, very interesting. And I couldn't agree more with you. Like, when I sit down and think about what we do, and I think, well, I have individuals coming and doing our diplomas, but then I also sit there and I think it's easier to actually go to a college or private education company and then provide them with our diplomas and let them have the people come in from a corporate perspective. So now I fully get it, because you're working with one rather than say 50 students, and it's a lot simpler and the budget's there, and that's what they do. So no, it makes sense. I suppose from your expertise, how are you seeing sort of, you said you're sort of a data nerd, and likewise, how do you sort of see sales techniques shifting, and how are you sort of incorporating that into your business?
It's really interesting, actually. So I just created a research study into sales strategies and things that are working and not working for entrepreneurs. And we had a huge data set get involved, which was really, really exciting. And one of the things that I noticed was that over the last 3 years, particularly since the pandemic, lead generation has really, really changed. So what I found from the research study was that actually 68.5% of people say that they only generate between 1 and 5 sales leads a month. Like the average person will close 1 in 4. So if you're only generating 5 leads a month, you're only giving yourself the potential for 1 sale. And I thought that's super interesting. So at some point, we need to help people figure out how they can be bold enough, perhaps, to implement good lead generation, things that are best practice. We've also seen the diminishing of LinkedIn. That's gone through a real interesting roller coaster over the last few years, in that when the pandemic hit, every stakeholder and decision maker was on LinkedIn all day, because a lot of the workplaces didn't have hybrid capacity yet. And so lots of people were sending, spammy DMs, and were kind of posting themselves crying on the feed, which is not something I've necessarily ever felt the need to do, but kudos and brave things to you guys if you do. And now we're seeing stakeholders have completely moved away. It's almost like they were so inundated that actually it's become much harder to communicate on LinkedIn with them directly. So we're seeing a huge resurge in cold email marketing, for example. That's working really well if done well. And I think, as ever with sales, there are lots of crap techniques out there. If you're doing something well, you're polite, you're persistent, it will work. If you're doing things and you're like, oh, my guinea pig just died, and if you don't respond to my email, my other guinea pig will also die, which we have seen, that's probably not going to be as popular in 2024.
I've seen some of them. I think some of them, man, I got like a cold email the other day of like, I think they're using some sort of AI, but like, would you like to have a virtual coffee with me? And it's got like my name written on the side of the cup. And I was just like, that's cool, but my name's sort of like half hanging off of the cup. And I was like, it looks like you've just put paint onto the cup. And I was like, the idea is cool, but I mean, I don't really want to have a virtual coffee with you if it's like, it's just a bit weird. So I just think,
so strange. Like AI has become this huge thing, and everyone's like, oh, I'll just use a chat GPT prompt to write all my stuff. And you're thinking, God, don't be lazy. You should know your products and services at this point. Like, if you don't know how to write an email about them, figure out a decent way. Don't plug it into chat GPT and hope for the best. We had a client of mine who, during the pandemic, a salesperson actually reached out to her and said, would you like to come on a virtual picnic in the park with me and my family? And she was like, no, I wouldn't. And he was like, but you could, like, my whole family will be there. You can sit like 5 meters or whatever it was away. And she was a bit like, I don't know that this is the business that I want to go after. So yeah, we've seen a lot in the last 3 years of just soul destroying.
So you'd say that we're seeing sort of sales trends shift away now from, say, LinkedIn, more moving to cold email marketing sort of thing?
Proactive outreach is going to be huge, always has been. If you look at sales over the last 50 years, if anyone listening has ever watched The Wolf of Wall Street, whilst I don't agree with a lot of Jordan Belfort's methods on selling penny stocks, you can see that over the last 50 years, it's all been about proactive outreach and relationships. And unfortunately, I think what we saw sort of pre-2019 was, how can we automate as many of our relationships as possible? So we see a lot of mass emailing, we see a lot of mass DMing, we see the automated services on LinkedIn that are just posting for you or connecting with people for you. And that took a lot of the relationship based sales piece out of it, which meant that actually a lot of people weren't making the money they could have done because they didn't have the leverage, they didn't have the long-term relationships, they didn't have the inside knowledge of companies, and they just became order takers, essentially working on huge PSLs that they couldn't fulfill. Whereas now we're seeing this idea of let's target and identify the right companies that we want to work with and build relationships with the right stakeholders and actually have interesting and intelligent conversations where we challenge their perceptions on things that they just do because they've always done it that way, and start looking at, you know, other areas that are more interesting. Even if you look at the range of services that is being sold to corporates now, it's vastly different than 2050. You know, that's an insane change in the wellness space, the DEI space. I've got people who are selling like mixed martial arts training to corporates. Yeah. And you couldn't have paid me money to have like tried that in 2014, but they are. And I've got clients who are selling menopause support, fertility support, male cardiac health support. Again, these are things. I worked in corporate for a very long time, and the well-being was, is the coffee machine on and is it working? And now they're like,
now there's a lot of mental health training going on and stuff like that. You can get deployed. I think to be honest, we've even done it.
Really?
We're internally someone. So I think it was like our local business commerce in the local town was like, have you guys done mental health awareness training? And I was like, no, we've got first aid training though. They're like, no, it's not that. It's an addition. And I was like, right, okay, let's do this and see what it is. And to be honest with you, it was actually, I think it was pretty awful. I don't think it was good at all. It was something, it was like a day, and it was. I know it sounds really bad to say, but like the takeaway from it was, it's not okay to call people snowflakes. That's literally that's literally what the takeaway message was. Is, you know, understand people are can have bad days, and I'm like, well, I knew that before we started, but it was just like, you know, a lot of people say, oh, don't be a snowflake, you know, and it's like, you can't call people that. And I just sit there and I sort of think, I can't believe, you know, that's sort of what people are actually buying into now.
You know, it's easy. I mean, who's saying that anyway? Everyone knows now that you shouldn't be saying that to people. I think the quality of training is really interesting because a lot of the people that I talk to are more afraid of selling their services to companies because they go, why would a big company want to work with someone like me? Like, I'm just myself. And I think it's so interesting because when we talk about quality, often the people or businesses who are completely unconcerned with the quality of their services are the people who will sell the most and create the least impact, and their stuff will be useless. Whereas the people who start out thinking, oh, but, you know, why would companies buy from me? Or will it be good enough? Or how many testimonials do I have to have? Or how much credibility or certifications? Those will be the people who create amazing trainings, but who really, really struggle to sell them because it's a huge confidence piece. And I'm really sorry you have that experience because that's not what mental health first aid training should be about. You know, it's supposed to be.
I get you. I was sitting there thinking, I don't know, that was I don't think that was a well spent day. I think it was basically teaching someone common sense practice of how to talk to a human, if I'm honest with you, and, you know, ticking the box saying you can now do that. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see that. I mean, I suppose, like, from your experience, what sort of, you know, what entrepreneurs have you worked with where you've successfully gone, right, you were selling to retail and consumers and now you're going to corporate? Do you have any sort of, you know, examples that you can share?
Yeah, quite a few. So there's a wonderful lady called Julie Dennis who came to me in 2018, the December, and she'd been trying to sell her menopause services to women in Facebook groups and getting them to take ownership of the experience they had through perimenopause and menopause itself. And she came to me and she was like, I just can't do this anymore. I've got 1,500 women in a Facebook group and they just don't buy. They just want somewhere they can vent about how shitty the experience is. And I'm a woman, and in all honesty, before Julie came to me, I'd never really thought about menopause. Wasn't something that was like on my radar or that I was particularly looking forward to. I think like most people. And I said to her, I was like, well, have you thought about selling to corporate companies? And she said, well, would they buy? I was like, well, I don't know, but give it a go. It might be more exciting than selling in a Facebook group. And within her first 6 weeks, she managed to get some corporate clients. She was selling to public sector and not-for-profit organizations, so housing associations, local government, things like that.
Yeah.
And she picked a couple of contracts, and she would go in and deliver these sessions, not just on what is the menopause, what are the symptoms, that kind of stuff, but she did some really interesting things around allyship, creating allyship around menopause. So how companies can create reasonable adjustments for people, how we can actually involve men in the conversation around menopause, because most men know women going through the menopause, and apparently we're not that easy to deal with. So, Julie was going in there creating these really innovative trainings. And over the last 4 years, she's been fully booked. She takes 9 weeks off every year. She's working with public sector and not-for-profit organisations, chaired a panel at the House of Lords talking about menopause and why it should be a protected characteristic, which still isn't. So thank you very much, government. And also for companies like Coca-Cola, who are just exploring this whole new avenue. So for me, I think that's pretty cool. Taking 9 weeks off a year, being booked, talking about something that...
I suppose from their perspective, I mean, what I was going to say, weirdly enough, that, obviously my podcast is all about investments and, that approach. And we deal with a lot of people within the banking and finance sector. But I still, to this day, have probably, I'm going to say at least 5 different people asking to come on the podcast every month to talk about menopause. And I'm just like,
do you know what?
I don't know.
Menopause and banking is like a big thing. And so I know people, a lot of my clients have sold in fertility, menopause, male menopause, so andropause services to specifically FS companies. Because FS companies are so limited in the amount of women they have anyway. And so when you go through menopause, you basically can get brain fog and things that really, some people have described it as if they feel like they're going crazy. And so you get all these women who are at the peak of their career in banking or in wealth management firms or whatever, and they can't even go to a meeting and talk. So they leave because they don't want to say to anybody, actually, I'm going through the menopause and it's really difficult and I just need a fan in the room, or I need some space between meetings. They just leave because there's no medical support. It's so difficult now on the NHS to get any kind of, HRT or medication for it. So have a menopause expert. I'm going to push Julie because, she's right there. But any menopause expert, I'm sure will be great if they know their stuff. I think this is the way, though, that the working world is changing. And that's because of a societal change, right? The generation below us, who I'm going to say Gen Z, they are so much clearer about what they want from work. They want work-life balance, they want holidays, they want to be 9 to 5. I see some of their email signatures now, and the millennial in me just cringes because they're like, yeah, see you never, I'm going on holiday, this won't be read. And I'm just like, oh god, I would never have written that. I wouldn't write it now.
Yeah. Seen a few like that, and I'm just like, no, what are you doing? Yeah. It's like I'm currently away, sitting on a beach, sipping a, whatever, and I will pick this email up in a week. I'm like, what?
That's nice for you, Paul, but
yeah. I don't care where you are. I'll wait a week. I'll speak to you in a week.
It's the one that leaves the gifts. They put the gifts in their emails, and I'm like, I can't. It makes me feel sick to think about doing that in my emails. And that is just, it's that generational thing. And so now, because we're seeing this generation in the workspace, companies are thinking, well, we have to provide for them, because a big part of how they choose the companies they want to work for is what your benefits, what's your wellbeing policy, all this kind of thing, which 10 years ago didn't matter. Companies don't want you to be happy. They're paying you to do the job. Show up, do the job, they'll keep paying you. That's kind of the deal. Now it's very much, how can we support employees? How can we support employees through different phases of life? Because companies recognize that for every pound you invest in an employee, you get about £5 back. That's a huge,
is that a known stat, is it? I don't know.
Yeah, and it changes across the different areas of support. So I think it was Deloitte, and this may be a misquote, so I apologize if it's not Deloitte and it's McKinsey. They all seem pretty similar. But they did a study recently, just after the pandemic. They said for every pound you spend on wellbeing services, you get £5 back. About a year later, they said, okay, for every pound you spend on wellbeing services, you get £3 back. But in other areas like professional skills and development, you still get 5. So what's really interesting is that now that we are looking at employee benefits and support as being tangible returns on investment, companies are like, well, why wouldn't you invest in them then? If we're gonna spend £1 per person on training to do this thing, and we're gonna make them 300% more effective, a no-brainer. That's the interesting thing. So now we're measuring the return on investment for companies in terms of these trainings. So that crap training you had, don't know how much it cost, but not worth it, right? If you maybe had invested in an alternative company for mental health first aid, and if they just sat down with you beforehand and went, okay, cool, can you identify any employees who've struggled? Have you got particular questions or particular things? You might have found it more valuable. And that's the interesting part of it.
It's interesting, isn't it, to basically see a ROI based on how much you invest back into your individuals that are pushing your company, I suppose. Makes complete logical sense. I suppose one of the questions I've got is, you mentioned stuff like reaching out to Coca-Cola, local governments, things like that. What's, a lot of people going, that's easy if you know your way in, but like, what is that way of reaching out to those corporate companies that is effective from getting responses?
So I tell people it's a 5-step cycle. Right. The first stage is always clarity. Who are you selling to and what transformation are you going to bring? And what I mean by that is pick an industry. So many people are like, well, what I can do can be applied to every industry. Yeah, it might do, but you're not going to sell as much doing it that way. So there's no point. Go an inch wide, mile deep. Right. So take financial services as the example. Go and work with wealth management firms or asset management firms, hedge funds. Then you go, okay, lead generation. The process of generating qualified leads that are interested in what I have to offer and have the budget to pay me. So this means we're not looking at like junior assistants or people who are HR assistants and at that lower level. We're looking at decision makers who have control of the budget and who have responsibility for your area. So if you're providing mental health first aid training, well-being is going to be a key decision maker for you. If you're in marketing, probably heads of comms or directors of marketing are going to be good for you. Identify 3 to 5 decision makers in every company that you want to work with, because that gives you what I call multiple internal champions, people who will talk about you and push processes along for you, even when you're not in the room. And that's really important. Then you've got your business development. So the process of building, maintaining, and leveraging relationships. It's how we show up on calls. It's how we follow up with people. It's how we keep in touch, stay top of mind. With this, it's about be interesting. Ask questions that demonstrate credibility, like you do on this podcast, right? You talk to people about your topic. You ask good questions. That's how people understand you are credible. When we show up on sales calls, same thing. Okay, what do they do within their organization? What are they responsible for? How much money do they have to play with? Have transparent conversations around the problems that they're experiencing. What transformation do you want? Then you've got offers and proposals. Very simple. Articulate and create solutions that actually meet the need. So many people start with offers first, and it drives me crazy, because just because you've written down a piece of paper and made it look pretty, some great offer that you think is awesome, you will go onto a sales call and you will only look for the keywords that you think are going to help you sell that offer, not what is this client saying? What do they actually need? Does it fit the offer I've already got? Or do I need to create something different? Or do I need to word it differently when I send it to the client so they understand that it's going to be relevant? And then finally, you've got delivery and resell. And most people are great at delivery because it's the bit they like. They go in, they deliver an amazing client experience, which you should be, because then you should be reselling. Your job isn't to have hundreds and hundreds of clients. It's to have 10 really great clients who buy from you repeatedly, who refer you out repeatedly, that you can make lots and lots of money from. And that's how my clients are doing 250K, 550K months, not years.
Yeah, no, it's very impressive. So how many sort of entrepreneurs do you look after, I suppose, from a coaching perspective? Do they like come on for, say, like 6 months, 12 months and then drop off because they've reached their goals, or do they stay and, do repeat business with yourself?
So we sell the self-study now, and people come into that container for 12 months. They get 12 months of hot seat support, and that's essentially on Zoom with me answering questions around metrics and proposals and whatever. Most people will hit their goals in 12 months and be like, okay, what now? And for that, we do different things. I've just come back from a few days in London delivering an in-person 2-day planning retreat, which is why I am in need of caffeine, because there's a lot of brain power when you're working with 10 to 15 people in a really intimate setting to plan out their entire year and to look at their entire sales strategy. But I say to everybody, like, times change, your need for coaching changes. So really, especially with sales, you don't want it all the time. You need to pick the part of the sales process that you're struggling with and figure out, what's the solution I need? Is it something that's end to end that just gives me the templates, tells me what to do? Or is it that I need to sit down and go, okay, how can I create a sales process? How do I set my revenue goals? What am I supposed to do if I want to scale beyond 150K to 500K? Those things always will require more objective perspectives and probably one-to-one.
Interesting. It's very interesting. So on that, just an idea, like so you work with like a entrepreneur for their entire sales plan for like a couple of days a year. Are you focused on like a smaller group of people, or are you working with, say, like 100 people? Like what sort of scale?
Those sorts of things that are high end and deep brain work, because we provide everyone with a personalized plan of what they need to do and all that kind of thing. Maximum of 50. If you look at things like our Converting Corporates events that are much more about, this is 2 days of workshops and implementation, you come along as a big group, we'll take 100 in that. The self-study is an ongoing thing. So we've just had our 821st person, which is pretty cool. But they are primarily a self-study group. Outside of the hot seat sessions that I'm running, I'm not sitting down with those people every day and being like, okay, how are you going to drive your business today? What are you going to do? So for me, my business model really evolved from sort of 2014, where it was very one-to-one. Let's sit down once a week. Let's coach you through what are you doing and what you're not doing, to how can we support people at scale and make sure that they're getting the right results. And that's what's important. And for some people, that is about, here, have this templatized process, just go and implement it. And for some people who've bypassed that or gone well in advance of that, it's okay, let's sit down, let's turn you into a company now, and let's look at your plan, and let's look at your sales objectives and create strategy and things that are more bespoke to you.
An interesting enough question for yourself. So did you do any marketing budget? Did you do any paid advertisement behind it? Or was you doing your sort of own strategy of reaching out to corporates to sell your service?
I got shut down on Facebook ads in 2018. I had a Facebook ads manager that was fine. Like they weren't bad at Facebook ads. But for whatever reason, sales and Facebook ads didn't do too well then, because money claims and things like that. So my paid advertising is really limited. What we did was create a podcast in June 2019, the Selling to Corporate podcast. We've produced over 100 episodes, and that was what made us £1 million in the first 99 episodes, just from the podcast. We have money coming in from other things, but from that podcast, from entrepreneurs buying from us, that's what made the kind of...
They literally just tuned in and was like, I like what you're saying, I like your character, I'm going to come and work with you.
Yeah. We went from having 121 listens in our first month, which is, as you all know, as a podcaster, a little bit soul destroying. And even now, we have low numbers of listenership, but our listenership converts really well, because we have people who are super motivated, super engaged, and who just transition really well from, do I want to learn more about this? Am I willing to do the work? To buying. Or people who are like, actually, Jess is not my vibe. That's cool. Yeah. I'm going to go elsewhere. On the corporate side of things, I do everything that I tell people to do. So, my team send out all of our proactive outreach for me. We use cold email as a strategy because it works really, really well. It's got a higher response rate than anything else. And that has been really interesting to go from me doing it every day in 2014 to having other people who do it for me.
Yeah, no, it sounds really interesting. From your podcast perspective, though, where did your initial listeners come from? Did you just put it out there and it goes through the ranking and people found you on Spotify, Apple
Yeah.
Podcast?
So I had a podcast before. I had a really successful podcast before that we would do 2 episodes a week on, and like we had really big name people come onto it. It was very cool. Much bigger listenership. When I shut that down and we started selling to corporate, I was like, I don't want to do that again. I don't want the capacity of having to produce so many episodes. So we started with 1 episode. We focused on having really good show notes for SEO.
Yeah.
And in our first month, those listeners came from the SEO, from what they were searching on Google. As time's gone on, we're really fortunate in that we do have this really small listenership, but they are super engaged and they refer us like the podcast regularly. So what happened was, over time, we were getting people who were buying from us being like, oh my God, my friend so-and-so recommended your podcast and I've binged all 30 episodes, or I've binged all 40 episodes and now I'm buying this course. And I'd be like, oh wow, that's cool. And so these days, you know, we tend to make the podcast our first point of call, which I appreciate isn't necessarily the most popular digital marketing advice. I know that YouTube is huge, you know, and TikTok and Instagram and whatever. But for me, I think there's something really cool about going on a dog walk with somebody and being in their ears, and that kind of subconscious time that they're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to listen to this. Oh, maybe I will implement that. And it's
I think it's very different, isn't it? I think like the time, you know, the long form content of a podcast, I think like you actually get to know, you feel like you know the person from a personality perspective. Whereas on a TikTok or Instagram, it's like 60 seconds. You don't have that. Oh yeah, I know that little bit about that person. I think so. Even though the demographic is a lot smaller, they're more engaged with you, and it's more of a loyal base, isn't it?
100%. I mean, I've got a dog who, you guys have been listening, you'll have heard him snore a few times throughout the episode. And Max has been, or I've cohabited with Max for over 10 years. And he's a rescue and he thinks it's hilarious. As soon as I get my microphone out, he thinks it's hilarious. He'll sit right next to it, he'll snore. And we have people, when I've recorded podcasts away from home, who've written in and been like, oh my God, I couldn't hear Max. Is he okay? And you know that what they're saying is, oh my God, is your dog dead? And it's like, no, he's fine. Like, and we had to put him on the website. We've made him the chief marketing officer. Like, but we get regular people who will send me emails with offers for dog beds because they're like, Max has got arthritis, gotta send him a good bed. Like, you don't get that on platforms.
That side of things I can 100% relate to. Like, I did a YouTube video probably like 3 years ago of where a pigeon got hit by a car, and I was like, I picked it up and I like was like, oh, I'm gonna save this pigeon or whatever. And we put it all on YouTube.
Don't tell me it died.
No. And it's like I was like, I can't put it inside because that's just a bit weird. So I was like, I got like a small dog bed and that, and I put it in the garage and I put some seed down, and then it was just like I put it down there and then it flew off, and I was like, I've just been completely like mugged off by this pigeon. You know, like completely mugged off by it. And you know, we put this whole like, you know, the Fug Life glasses on and stuff like that, like doing the joke with it. And then no joke, every time I was doing events or meeting up with people would be like, how's Pidgey? And I'm like, no way that you're talking about a video that's like 3 years old and you're asking about pigeon. I was like, I don't know, mate, but it used to hang around for so long. Don't know why. It was there for months and it just ended up being in my YouTube videos. And I was just like, everyone would come and say, how's Pidgey doing? Or I haven't seen your dog in ages. Like, is he all right? And I'm just like, that is such a strange environment of.
It's so funny.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, what people put their attention on, you know.
Well, that's it. You get a relationship with people. And I've had people who've come up to me at events where I've been speaking and they're like, oh my God, do you know that you laugh like Jimmy Carr? And someone told me this like 8 or 9 years ago. And ever since I've been like, oh my God, I really do. And it's one of those things where, see, now you'll listen back to this episode, you'll be like, wow, she really does like laugh like Jimmy Carr. But it's that kind of thing, isn't it? Where people pick up on these things. I think with audio much more differently, because you're only giving them one interaction. When you have to watch something on a screen, I think it's quite high energy, it's quite intense. When you're going for a walk, you're cleaning your house, you put a podcast on the background, you're only listening. And I think that's really nice for people. They get to connect better with you. They get to build that relationship with you in your life, with your pigeon. You know, and that's really cool. But you don't get that through like the heavily curated, let's make our Instagram reels look perfect. Let's have a really nice grid that's super pretty, but doesn't actually do anything. And I think that's the interesting thing about sales is people talk about, is it relationship based? You know, how can I build better relationships with people? How can I sell without selling? And I'm like, I don't understand why you would want to sell without selling. You're just building a relationship, being like, hey, if you've got this problem, this thing's really good for solving it. If you don't want to solve it, that's cool too. And that's it. That's the only conversation you're having day in, day out. But when people have got that relationship with you from a podcast, from a YouTube channel, you know, something that is, like you say, long form content, it feels much easier because it feels like you're talking to an old friend. You're like, and your old friends wouldn't recommend something shit, right? They'd only recommend good things for you.
Yeah, it's real. It's like true rapport building, isn't it, in the social media space? I think it's been awesome sort of listening to your story and what you're doing. I can't believe we've already done like 45 minutes just talking about this stuff. But I suppose, where can my listeners find more about you and what you do, and what's the best way to follow your journey?
Me, my Jimmy Carlaugh, and the dog are all on the Selling to Corporate podcast. So that is the best place to find us. If you are really cool about it, you can hang out on LinkedIn. Nobody else hangs out on LinkedIn. It's very clunky, but I write a bunch of articles on there. They don't have pictures of the dog or my Jimmy Carlaugh, though. So I'd stick to the podcast.
Well, honestly, it's been a pleasure having you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.